At the crossroads of the Mediterranean maritime routes, enriched with 7,000 years of history, the Maltese Islands have been a home, stronghold, trading post and refuge for so many cultures. Megalithic temple builders, seafaring Phoenicians, and the traveller apostle Paul, who gave the local inhabitants their Christian faith, as evidenced by the numerous churches found in every town and village on the Maltese Islands, have all left their testimony. The rule of the Knights Order of St. John over Malta gave these islands what is perhaps the most important mark engraved in stone in Maltese history. The Knights were responsible for some splendid architectural masterpieces and precious works of art found in the many palaces and churches they built. These gems were carefully protected behind some formidable bastion walls. Besides the Knights of St. John, the French and nearly 200 years of British rule have left their imprint for you to discover. Looking at a world map, the word Malta usually appears bigger than her islands themselves, but do not be put off by this apparent insignificance. The Maltese Islands have a lot to offer. At just a couple of hours' flight from major European cities, the island of Malta and its sister island of Gozo have several World Heritage sites. The enigmatic prehistoric temples. Malta's Baroque capital Valletta, founded by the Knights. And the walled medieval capital, Mdina, are all familiar sights not only to the people of Malta, but to the thousands of tourists who travel year after year to these islands, to the heart of the Mediterranean. The gem of the Maltese archipelago is Gozo, a small island of charm and beauty.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you on board the MV Gozo, operating between Malta and Gozo.
After a 25-minute relaxed boat trip, bypassing the small island of Comino, situated halfway in the channel, you step off the ferry onto the fertile island of Gozo. This island's leisurely pace of life is dictated by the rhythms of the seasons. The daily routine of life for the 25,000 people who live in Gozo reflects a calm traditional way of life, which is only slightly changed in the busier summer months. Besides being home to the Gozo Channel ferry service, which offers around-the-clock service with its fleet of ships, Mjar Harbour is also a small yacht marina and port to most of Gozo's fishing community. Fishing is still an important activity in Gozo. At Mjar Harbour, fishermen repair their nets for their next fishing trip, practiced mostly through traditional methods. The main fishing effort is to catch the Mediterranean bluefin tuna when this fish is in season. Swordfish, like tuna, is caught on baited long lines during most of the year. When dolphinfish reach the central Mediterranean on their annual migration through the Med, the Gozo fishermen may be seen busily netting this fish to sell in the local fish market. Smaller than neighbouring Malta, the geography of Gozo is a delicious mix of rolling green hills, lush valleys and small sandy coves, dusted with a scattering of sleepy villages soaked in the shimmering sunshine. The people of Gozo are very friendly and many speak English fluently. They would readily invite you into their homes if given half a chance. On the island of Gozo, known also as the Island of the Three Hills, you find most villages nestling on hilltops. Broad avenues lined with oleander bushes lead from one village to another. Sandwiched between the hills, one can drive alongside lush valleys with terraced fields where it is possible to buy the local produce of fresh vegetables and fruit from the farmers themselves. Old stone farmhouses dot the countryside. Some of these farmhouses have recently been beautifully converted for rent, and staying in one would certainly make your stay in Gozo a delight. The capital, Victoria, known by the locals as Rabat, with its walled medieval citadel, is an intriguing town, rich in history, dating back to the Phoenician occupation. When the Maltese islands were part of the Roman Empire, the citadel was later developed into a Roman town. Although it is quaintly traditional rather than modern, Gozo is by no means out of touch with the present. In Victoria, one finds modern shopping malls, catering for the needs of today's lifestyle. The former fishing village of Marsalforn has become Gozo's main tourist resort. Here one finds the highest concentration of holiday apartments and a hotel overlooking the beach. The Marsalforn area has many restaurants serving both local and continental dishes amongst others. Gozo's beauty has been immortalized by some of the greatest writers in the history of literature. Thought to be the legendary island of Calypso, its mystical atmosphere and incredible beauty were captured by Homer in the epic work The Odyssey. Back in the time when Gozo was called Ogygia, the Greek hero Ulysses allegedly spent 7 years on this island, seduced by the nymph Calypso, who is said to have lived in this cave overlooking the sandy bay of Ran al-Hamra, where Ulysses is believed to have been shipwrecked. Take time to relax on the sandy beaches kissed by the azure blue water, where you can soak up the sun or enjoy some of Europe's best diving. On the west coast of the island, Shlendi Bay offers an ideal place to take up scuba diving. The shallow water of this sandy, sheltered bay makes learning the skills of scuba as safe as it can ever be. Sea temperatures around Gozo average 27 degrees Celsius in summer and drop to around 15 degrees Celsius from December to March. It is hardly ever too cold to dive around Gozo. On the right-hand side, swimming out of Shlendi, is the bay's little secret, an entrance to an underwater cave. The depth at the entrance is only 5 meters, making it suitable for relative beginner divers. This is also a good introduction to cave diving, an experience which would help if one is to enjoy some of the most spectacular sights along Gozo's coastline. Shlendi Cave is not really a cave, but more of a submerged tunnel, which has another opening or exit point running right underneath the base of the cliff's wall. It's a good shortcut to reach the other side of the cliff without the need to swim right around the cliff's promontory, forming the northern extremity of Shlendi Bay. For the seasoned diver, the deeper waters on the west and northern coast offer some of the most spectacular dive sites around Gozo. Dueira is where geology and the sea have produced some of Gozo's most spectacular coastal scenery, such as Fungus Rock and Crocodile Rock, which takes its name from the shape of the rock. The natural coastal features are not limited to the Fungus Rock and Crocodile Rock. Only a walking distance away from these is the Azure Window, perhaps Gozo's most popular natural landmark, shown in postcards. The cliffs forming the Azure Window offer another interesting feature, a 100-meter-long tunnel cutting into the rock face, connecting Dueira's inland sea with the open water. For the experienced diver, this kind of coastal environment easily creates the urge to conduct some underwater explorations. It whets the desire to discover the many wonders that are hidden below this blanket of water, the bluest this side of the Maldives. If what you see above water is intriguing, what awaits below is even more fascinating. The Blue Hole is a natural rock pool that is easily accessible by divers from the shore. It is a spectacular and a memorable beginning to a series of underwater adventures where divers will encounter other natural underwater architectural features, such as this picturesque arch, which leads the diver to the open sea, to a place where scuba divers and fish may easily come face to face. Visibility is excellent, often around 30 meters. Swimming towards the pinnacle, the foot of the azure window, a seahorse curls its tail not to drift with the current. An octopus tucks in its nest, avoiding any clashes with bigger predators, such as this moray eel that is prowling in the area looking for an easy meal. Even this shamefaced crab is wise enough to burrow in the gravel. Both octopus and the moray eel would definitely enjoy the crab for lunch. The torpedo ray electrocutes animals which get too near and feeds on them. It heads out to deeper water and is commonly found in waters down to 100 meters deep. Young amberjacks hunt in small shoals. They can pick up smaller creatures hiding amongst the marine flora. On the left-hand side of the blue hole, a crack in the cliff wall, known as Crack Cave or the Chimney, adds fun to the dive. The entrance to this little chimney is very deceptive and only a diver at a time can pass through. The most impressive underwater cave formation found in this area is situated halfway between the Blue Hole and Crocodile Rock. Coral Cave has a very large round entrance that is a full 20 meters across, lying at a depth close to 30 meters. Inside, the roof slopes gently down at the back, while the cave floor rises gradually upwards until they meet. Marine organisms, such as the multicolored sponges, the delicate lace coral, and the false red coral, cover the roof and the side walls of this cave. False corals are bryozoans, colonial animals that live in a hard skeleton and are quite different from the true corals found in the tropical seas, but are equally fragile. They can easily break, even by the bubbles from the diver's exhaled air, let alone if touched. In fact, on the sandy seabed inside the cave, you will notice the broken dead coral that once graced Dwayra's Coral Cave. Although diving the Crocodile Rock may be done as a shore dive, it is probably best to join a boat, avoid the long swim, and enjoy the dive more. Directly below the seaward side of the rock, the cliff drops vertically down to 38 meters, where a number of boulders make it an ideal habitat for fish, which shelter in the gaps between these rocks, hide in the cracks found in the cliff face, or simply swim in the open. This is one of those dive sites where coming face to face with marine life is a certainty. A spiny lobster tucked in a crack in the drop-off filters for food drifting in the water. Not one, but two large moray eels, each with its own space, but keeping each other company just the same, patrol the area for intruders and dash out on their prey when the opportunity arises. Further out in the open sea, a shoal of barracuda follow each other, nearer to the surface. These fast pelagic fish are found in all warm, temperate and tropical seas of the world. They search for reefs and shallow water where they can hunt down their prey mercilessly like a pack of wolves. While in the neighborhood, you may explore the inland sea tunnel. It's safe to swim underwater, but keep an eye for passing boats that regularly enter or exit this tunnel, taking tourists on boat trips to view Dwayra's coastal attractions. Once outside the tunnel, on either side, it's all wall diving. If deep diving is your objective, this dive will not disappoint. Depths in excess of 50 meters can easily be reached, but remember that reaching greater depths does not necessarily mean encountering more fish. Bypassing Marseille Fawn, Going through a bayar, along a series of salt pans, you reach Reta Point, on the northernmost tip of Gozo. At Reta Point, divers are urged to dive with caution, as it is renowned with the local divers for its deep water. It is here that many local technical divers come to carry out their first deep mixed gas training dives. Diving Reta Point means swimming down sheer drop-offs. Due to the strong prevailing northwest wind, which at times makes diving here very difficult, the coast is indented with crevices. The rugged features above the water extend below the surface. But for the experienced divers who would love to spice up their dive, Reta Point offers two specific underwater features which would require two separate dives. One is Billinghurst Cave. This is the largest underwater cave known to the local diving community. This cave has no confined spaces, and for this reason is not considered a difficult environment to explore. Good torches are, however, required. Its sheer size still requires careful planning, especially in gas management. You do not want to run out of air halfway inside. The cave has the shape of a smoking pipe, as towards the end, 95 meters inside, the cave arches upwards and a diver could surface inside an air-filled chamber. At this angle, the diver is unable to see the blue aura coming from the cave entrance and would need to drop down a few more meters before this light comes to view. Reta's other interesting dive site is a visit to the deep chimney. By entering a small opening at the base of the Reta Reef headland, at about 30 meters, you find yourself in an enclosed bell-shaped chamber. The sandy bottom inside the chamber is nearly 60 meters deep. Once at the bottom, be careful not to stir the fine sediment too much, as this may reduce underwater visibility drastically. Known as Fred, a resident friendly lobster, eyes every intruder with suspicion and prefers to stay on the alert just in case. Its claws are sharp and always ready for action when confronted. Deep diving must not be taken lightly. So much so that with an ever-increasing number of both local and foreign divers going deeper, the Ministry for Gozo thought it was necessary that Gozo should have its own hyperbaric chamber besides the ones located in Malta. Hence, with the help of European Union funds, the Ministry for Gozo is installing a hyperbaric chamber at Gozo's General Hospital. Deep diving undertaken by less experienced divers can lead to emergency situations, and the quicker a distressed diver gets to a hyperbaric chamber, the better. Flying a diver to a chamber in Malta by helicopter only takes a short time. Having a chamber in Gozo further shortens this critical time. Occasionally, when the northwest wind, locally known as Il Maestral, blows over Gozo, it also affects some of the dive sites. In Gozo, the Dueira area is mostly affected, but divers can always find alternative dive sites. The southerly coast of Gozo, stretching from Injarashini to Shat Lahmar, is sheltered from this wind. Unfortunately, here nature has not been very kind to divers, and the area lacks those dramatic coastal features that are found on the other side of Gozo. To make this area more interesting for divers, in November 1999, the 80-meter-long wreck of the MV Shlendi was scuttled off Shat Lahmar and became Gozo's first shipwreck. This was initially quite a good diving attraction, even in its upturned position. The need for another wreck, or wrecks, was strongly felt. The vessels Carwela and Cominoland have been moored in Marsamxett harbour in Malta, waiting the day to be sold for scrap. With the help of the European Regional Development Fund, the Ministry for Gozo obtained 2 vessels which were sent to a shipyard to undergo the initial process of turning the ships into artificial reefs. the vessels had to be rendered environmentally and diver-friendly. Both vessels were thoroughly cleaned using high-pressure water jets to remove unwanted pollutants, as well as paint that was flaking off. Buoyancy tanks were fitted on both vessels. The idea was to ensure a controlled descent, enabling the vessels to sink in an upright position. This part of the scuttling process was very important, but will the buoyancy tanks be the solution? The day was set, 12th August 2006. The 49-meter-long Caruela, the larger of the two vessels, led the way, towed to its final destination. The 40-meter-long Camino Land trailed a short distance behind. Both vessels passed the small island of Camino. This was a trip these vessels had made many times, ferrying tourists and locals alike from one island of the archipelago to another. The scuttling exercise took nearly a whole day. Both vessels were placed in position by feeding a long mooring line tied from the rocks close by. The stern, anchored in place, tied down to an 8-ton concrete mooring block. The longest wait was for the Caruela to fill with water up to its open portholes. When the portholes were level with the surface, the sea gushed in quicker, sending the wreck on its last journey, 28 meters down to the seabed, hopefully in an upright position, not far from the drop-off that characterizes this particular dive site of Shat Lahmar. Finally, some 5 hours later, bow first, Caruela took a nosedive, lifted its stern and propellers to the sky before she finally succumbed to her new resting place. The buoyancy tanks come into action, but would they do their job? Would they hold the wreck upright? Checking the position of the Caruela had to wait until the Camino Land sank first. In the meantime, Camino Land was also taking in water. The MV Garibaldi moved in to hasten the process. Its water guns aimed towards the bowels of the vessel, filling up Camino Land that much quicker. But it was not an everyday sight, and onlookers braved the midsummer heat with their eyes fixed on the vessels, waiting in suspense for the final dip. This process was faster, as some 25 minutes after Caruela had sunk, Camino Land decided it was time to join her, not without a final twist though. The way that Camino Land was settling in the water gave everyone the impression that this wreck, upon taking a heavy list to its starboard side, was going to land at best on its side. The buoyancy tanks seemed to be ineffective. It did not take that long for divers to inspect Caruela, with buoyancy tanks still in place. The wreck was found in the desired position some 30 meters away from the drop-off. The effects of Boyle's law immediately became evident. Water pressure had crushed some metal tanks, as if they were made of plastic. This was a very graphic reminder of the immense pressure 30 meters of water can have. With the fine sediment-like mist brought about by the crushing force of this mass of iron still hanging eerily over the seabed, it would take some time before the underwater visibility could improve. Divers then had to remove the remaining buoyancy tanks before any recreational diving could start. It was also appropriate to take a look at how Camino Land had fared in the scuttling operation. Amazingly, this wreck sits upright. The top deck seems to have hit something very hard. Probably it hit the sidewall of the adjacent reef and then turned as it dropped deeper. The buoyancy tanks had done their job after all. Now it's the start of a new life cycle in the underwater world for these two vessels. Wrecks are certainly a good habitat for marine life, which will start to cover the exposed parts of these wrecks, especially the areas that receive natural light best. But even before the colonization of a wreck by marine life begins, wrecks are first and foremost a magnet for scuba divers. Most of the outer hull of Camino Land has been stripped from its old layers of paint. Will this enhance the coating of marine life attaching itself to the wreck? Will this colonization be faster on Camino Land rather than Caruela? Will Comino Land, on the other hand, deteriorate faster without its protective coat of paint? Only time will tell. Caruela, being larger, with more deck space to explore, is the immediate choice for those divers who come to explore these wrecks for the first time. You can perform wreck penetration dives safely and swim from one deck to another. Although it's possible to explore both wrecks in one dive, such a dive would give the diver very little time on each of the wrecks. Both wrecks lie at a general depth of about 38 meters, with the shallowest parts being at around 30 meters. They are easily reached from the shore, and the distance between the two wrecks is about 50 meters. Whether you do the two wrecks in one dive, or decide to explore each wreck at a slower pace, you will unavoidably go into decompression. A positive aspect of this dive site is that one can carry out decompression obligations whilst discovering the adjacent shallow reef, or simply watching out for any marine life that drifts by. For example, this friendly Mediterranean jellyfish. Unlike the common jellyfish, this one is completely harmless to touch. It's also known as the fried egg jelly and is found drifting close to the surface in summer and early autumn. Gozo comes complete with one of the Maltese archipelago's best preserved prehistoric temples, Gigantia. This is a World Heritage Site you must not miss. The name Gigantia, or gigantic, is a name aptly given to the largest of the megalithic temples found on the Maltese Islands, and one of the oldest freestanding stone structures in the world, predating the pyramids of Egypt by at least 1,000 years. As in Malta, summer is festa time in Gozo. Traditional religious festivities dedicated to patron saints provide a welcomed social opportunity to meet with friends. Each week, villages assume a celebration atmosphere for Gozitans and visitors from Malta and elsewhere. The feast of the village of Shara is dedicated to the Nativity of Our Lady. Beyond the religious connection, the feast day commemorates two important historic events for the archipelago: the end of the Great Siege of 1565, and also the day the hostilities of World War II came to an end for Malta and Gozo. It is said that, had all the underwater caves found off Gozo been on dry land, they would have accommodated and provided sufficient bomb shelter for the entire Gozitan population living at that time. A huge complex of underwater caves that few divers know about are those found not far from San Dimitri Point. These caves can only be reached by boat. These underwater cave systems, known locally as Tachamma, are in fact 5 caves situated one next to the other. One of them is actually 10 meters longer than the Retta Point Billinghurst Cave, but smaller in volume. The caves provide excellent cave dive training and are often used by local divers for this purpose. Most caves at Tachamma are long and narrow and may contain some marine life, like sea anemones, shrimp, or even sometimes larger marine animals such as this torpedo ray. One of the caves has a completely different shape from the others. It is spherical and has a very photogenic cave opening. It has 2 entrances, a kind of a double arch. This looks very similar to another underwater natural attraction, popularly known with divers as the Double Arch dive site, found in the vicinity of Abaya, situated between Marsalform village and Retta Point. San Dimitri Point is perhaps the most remote dive site in Gozo. It is fully exposed to rough seas and some strong underwater currents, but when all is nice and calm, it's a favorite with underwater photographers in search of an abundance of fish. This dive site is accessible only by boat and lies directly underneath towering cliffs. local legend recounts how a chapel once stood at the edge of the cliff before an earthquake shook the area and the chapel subsided, and is said to still lie somewhere in the abyssal depths, intact. Nobody in recent times has seen this mysterious little chapel, but another chapel was built further inland to replace it, giving rise to the local legend, one of the many legends you often hear about in Gozo. The legend centers on the original chapel dedicated to a warrior saint. The story goes that Saint Demetrius emerged from a painting in the chapel to save the only son of a humble and devoted old widow from the enslaving hands of corsairs. In fulfillment of the vow, the old widow promised to keep an oil lamp burning in the chapel every day until she died. Local fishermen still recount stories about an intact underwater chapel. Amazingly, it seems that the widow's oil lamp is still burning inside a recess in the chapel wall. Of course, you'll probably not find the chapel if you happen to be diving here, but if you do, you might be the lucky one. You've much better chances of encountering some good-sized fish. Like this ray, resting after a night's prowl in the area. A scorpionfish lies motionless, not easily scared off by predators, as it has a lot of self-protection. Besides having good eyesight and a camouflaged body, it also has an array of sharp and venomous spines to protect itself. In spite of its awesome appearance, the scorpionfish has one disadvantage: its tender white flesh is delicious. A bronze grouper has its own territory where it hunts and breeds. It darts off looking for prey such as this cuttlefish hiding under a boulder. Both cuttlefish and grouper make tasty meals. If you like to eat fresh fish as much as watching them in their natural environment, then Gozo has some of the finest restaurants serving local fresh produce. Dining outdoors whilst enjoying the cooler summer breeze is an excellent way to end a day in Gozo. No wonder so many locals and foreigners alike seek such venues for their evening dinner. If, after a day's diving and a good evening meal, you still have some energy left, why not visit one of the local night spots? This is far from being the quiet place where you can just hear the sound of your bubbles. If diving around Gozo isn't enough to quench your thirst, then a few minutes boat ride to Gozo's smaller neighbouring island should do the trick. Between Malta and Gozo lies the small island of Camino, a little island for you to discover. A paradise island for snorkeling and scuba diving. The Blue Lagoon, with its safe bathing in turquoise waters, offers an idyllic day out by boat. Camino, carefree and car-free, is a favourite escape all year round and has some quality dive sites and a wreck diving project in the pipeline. On the southwest tip of Camino, Lantern Point is Camino's most popular dive site. Entering the chimney normally marks the beginning of the dive. This is more of an L-shaped tunnel, which starts from shallow waters and lends its way to the base of a drop-off 18 meters deep, and home to some of Camino's best underwater inhabitants. Encountering some friendly groupers is becoming quite rare nowadays. The demand for its tender flesh places this particular fish on top of every fisherman's list. But here, off Lantern Point, it's still possible to encounter a good specimen. Of course, you'd need to search for them and look into every nook and cranny to find one. Diving off Camino and Gozo is very much characterized by spectacular drop-offs. Underwater caves come in various shapes and sizes, and the natural architectural features make good subjects for underwater photography. 3 young groupers play like kittens against the reef wall. A moray eel pokes its head out to see what all the commotion is about. A lonely white sea bream, normally preferring the company of others, doesn't seem to mind its solitude. A sea hare is such a graceful swimmer that most divers cannot resist the temptation of holding it gently. If one exercises caution, human interaction does not necessarily stress marine wildlife and can be such a unique experience. But the Mediterranean is a heavily fished, enclosed sea and lacks the abundance of natural fish stocks. It is in pocket zones in a few areas that healthy fish populations thrive. Although as yet the Maltese Islands do not have managed areas of marine conservation where marine life in general is protected, it is off Comino and areas such as Dueira in Gozo that the best candidate areas for marine protection have been identified. Placing a wreck as a diving attraction is one thing. Managing a marine park effectively is another. The latter is much more difficult and costlier to maintain. On the other side of Lantern Point, the particular dive site of Comino Caves is your guarantee to come face to face with an abundance of fish. This was once Comino's little underwater secret, but not anymore. It is fast becoming popular, not only with scuba divers, young and old, but also with snorkelers. This is home to hundreds of saddled sea breams. When they are offered food, saddled sea breams throng around divers in a sort of feeding frenzy. This has now become a common sight. The fish love it, and so do the divers. Such an experience is not very common in the Mediterranean, except, maybe, in areas where the fish are safeguarded by law. The dive site comes with its own set of very shallow underwater caves, one leading to another. When divers run out of fish food, these shallow caves are a nice conclusion to the experience. If interacting with marine life is something you love doing, then take along some appropriate food to feed the conger eel that resides within the caves. When the eel is hungry, it shows up when dinner is served. The conger eel will oblige by taking food from your finger, and not your finger. Plenty of natural light flows into the caves, but torchlight enables divers to look deeper into the crevices. Swimming through these caves requires optimum buoyancy control skills. But if these attractions are not enough to give you a fulfilling dive, another project plans to scuttle another wreck in relatively shallow water, not more than 20 meters deep. This will be ideal for novice divers who may perhaps find the other Gozo shipwrecks too deep. To make this dive complete, a decommissioned Armed Forces of Malta patrol boat is planned to be positioned close by, a couple of minutes underwater swim away. The fact is that, wherever you decide to dive, whatever you see, wherever you eat and whatever you do, Gozo and its smaller neighbour Comino will always be as romantic and as alluringly beautiful as in Calypso's time. With an area of about 36 square miles, Gozo is big enough to be interesting and small enough to be easy and personal. It's a family destination in many ways. It doesn't matter how many times you visit Gozo, one thing is for sure. There is always something new for you to discover when it comes to Gozo's little secrets.